Salvi's Search for the Universe. Chapter 4. Late night turned into early morning, as the nightly sky brightened by the faintest hue over the horizon. Sunrise would be some time yet, and the moon still shone its pale beams across the beads of dew, speckling the undulating landscapes of trees and meadows in the stretching distance. Braum leaned over the crenulations, his spear by his side, and simply admired it all for a moment. This moist and muggy air would have felt unbearable during the heat of the day, but at night it felt just right. This was his favorite weather, when the warmth of late spring nights fought with the chill of the dew and met somewhere in the middle. Since joining the night squad, he had grown an appreciation for this kind of thing. He could spare a moment to appreciate it, or rather, he had to for the sake of his own sanity. He had been marching up and down the walls, chasing shadows at double pace for days, or more accurately, nights, and as much as he liked the moist weather, his small clothes has rubbed a nasty rash around his crotch. Simply standing still is now pure bliss. His mouth began to ache for the taste of his homeland tobacco, or even just the familiar feeling of the pipe twixt his teeth. He stared at the moon, as if his fixed gaze could make it fall faster. He knew he should move. It was his job. But his mind couldn't think up an argument solid enough to convince his legs, and especially not his crotch. Another guard approached. This wouldn't have happened if he had kept on pace with his route, but... "Ho, Brauman!" "Morning, Gawain." "See anything?" Gawain asked, but it was more of an inside joke between the wall guards than an actual question. Everyone knew that nothing ever happened up here. Sometimes he envied the street guards. At least they got to break up the occasional street brawl. Though likely the street guards envied the wall guards as well for the lack of work. Perhaps it was simply human nature to never be truly content with what you were given. But one thing was certain: if he was patrolling the streets instead, at least he wouldn't need to resort to soft philosophy to keep himself from dying of boredom. Saw Carlos trip over his own spear. Braum shrugged. Gawain laughed. "I'm afraid I can't beat that one. I'll give him some shit next time I see him." He leaned against the parapet nearby. The horn he always kept at his waist clanked against the stone. "They've managed to double the guards up here now." "Sheesh." He rubbed his face. "They still keep us in the dark?" "Yep, and you can bet your last dirty copper they're going to keep it that way. What's ever happening? The captain's keeping it under heavy wraps." "Wish they at least tell us what we're supposed to be looking for." "If you want my guess, it's an assassin." "An assassin? If we were supposed to be looking for an assassin, Don't think they would have told us. See, that's the thing. Maybe there's something they don't want us to know. Remember that crazy fellow that showed up at the gate last week? Yeah? Well, it seems the guards involved are under some damned strict gag orders. But I've heard from some more loose-lipped servants that he was brought in for an audience with the Lord. That filthy bum? Yep, and that's not all. They say he was murdered shortly afterwards, inside the castle, under guard. What? Inside a castle? And the only person to say anything was some servant? What a load of horse shit, Gawain. Probably, but they say it happened around the same time the security went up like a torch in a hayloft. Makes sense, doesn't it? You listen far too much to gossip. Well, yeah, but a man's gotta do something to keep himself entertained up here. He cracked a smile. That's for sure. Anyway, want to go grab a drink tomorrow? He wiggled an imaginary cup in a gesture that transcended cultures. Drinking was always a challenge for the members of the Night Watch. All good taverns were closed when his shift was over, and staying up late enough to catch Gappy Hour was usually more trouble than it was worth. Don't know, Gawain. This whole week has got me bloody exhausted. You idiot! He slapped Braum on the armored back. That's exactly when you're supposed to be drinking. Braum sighed, then smiled. Yeah, you're probably right. What you got in mind? The King's Trousers. Never heard of it? Never heard of it? Gawain slapped his forehead and gazed up at the sky, as if praying to the gods for the patience necessary to deal with such ignorance. Mate, you really ought to live up some more. Once you get yourself a wife, you'll sorely miss the days when you could go out drinking whenever you damned well pleased. Yeah. Though, I'll need to stop by the apothecary and pick up some ointment if I'm going out anywhere. Why's that? All this marching has gotten my crotch burning worse than that time you went to that cheap brothel on Minster Street. Oh, mate, don't remind me about that. Gawain hung his head. Who told you about that, anyway? That was years ago, all right. Hadn't even met the missus back then. Carlos told me. Now I'm really going to give him some shit the next time I see him. He grinned. They shared a laugh. But it soon died off into silence. Braum looked at the moon, low now and nearly out of sight. He forced himself upright. Well, it's about time I got back to... He cut himself off, his ears suddenly keen in the empty stillness. Had he heard correctly? Yes, there it was again. Someone was screaming in the distance. Braum snatched up his spear at the same time as Gawain. All the good humour stripped from their faces. The laboured sound grew louder. In the shadowy distance, another soldier suddenly appeared, shouting and waving his arms frantically. They rushed to meet him in the middle. He jerked to a stop like a fully loaded cart and sagged to his knees, gulping air. Browman did not recognize him. He knew all the wall guards. Was he from the gate? The guard tottered and swayed like he was about to pass out. Even a recruit should have more stamina than this. Head hung, he pointed a shaky hand to the horn at Gawain's belt. "Too short," he gasped. "Oh, and long." Their eyes went wide. The call for an emergency inside the castle? Gawain snatched his horn and blew without hesitation. 2 powerful blasts rippled through the air, soon followed by a long, growling note. The sound every guard dreaded to hear. "What happened?" Braum seized the man by the shoulders. "Out with it, man!" The guard gasped and would have fallen if Braum had not steadied him. The horn's call was answered in the distance, again and again, echoing, growing ever distant like he had shouted in the valley of a vast canyon. "Inside, everyone unconscious," he wheezed. "Every last sentry to check didn't come back, so I checked. I almost passed out. Myself didn't have horn, so I ran here." "Good work, soldier," Gawain shouted, gripping his spear, and started running. Braum let the soldier collapse and ran after Gawain, racing around the battlement as his aching loins were baptized in fire. Salvi dug through the wardrobe. Why were they all so puffy and lazy? They were like cobwebs. Wouldn't they get caught on twigs when they walked through bushes? Human clothing was so impractical. Fabric fluttered through the air and settled in a pile behind. The human in the room was fast asleep, so it was a perfect time to trade. Finding a human around her size had been a lot of work. She had to go all the way upstairs before she stumbled upon this room. It was similar to the other bedrooms she had been in, except white and silver instead of red and gold, and a little less ornate. All these clothes were terrible. She was tempted to go without them, but she was getting tired of needing to hold everything in her hands. She had already looped the drawstring of the coin purse around her tail. Also, she seemed to recall that humans had a thing against nudity, and she did want to visit the city after all. She held up something that looked like 2 bowls on a strap. What in the world was this thing for? She tried to wear it on her head. What else was she supposed to do with it? It was thrown into the pile with the rest. She didn't see the appeal. Finally, towards the back, she found some practical clothing. She took the handsome blouse, slipped it on, and was pleased to find the neck wide enough to fit her head and horns. The long skirt was tight around her waist, but it fit as best you could expect from something made for a race without a tail. It even had pockets. She tried the undergarments, but couldn't get them past her tail. so she added them to the pile. She spun around, looking at herself at all angles in the magic glass that reflected things like the surface of water. Salvi didn't know anything about fashion or color theory, so she was unaware that the cool, earthly tones of the blouse and skirt perfectly matched the reddish brown of her scales and skin. But she was aware that she liked what she was wearing. The fabric was soft and glided over her skin like angel wings. It was hard to believe that clothes could be this comfortable. Her ears perked up. There was some kind of hooting noise coming from outside. It sounded a lot like a hunting horn. Were the humans going on a hunting party? She thought it was pretty early in the morning for that sort of thing. Humans sure were weird. The noise came again, and then again. Quieter each time. It was annoying, so she ignored it. She grabbed the purse from her tail and opened it for the first time, smiling expectantly, then frowned. They weren't coins at all. They were weird blunted rectangles made of metal. She sighed and traded for the clothes with 2 of the silvery ones before stuffing the purse into her newly found pockets. She gave the reflective glass one last glance and smiled. The pendant looked even better with clothes on. Now, she was all set. She skipped out of the room with a new outfit and headed down the hall to the top of the stairs. As impressive as this place was, she had seen enough. She reached the stairs and stopped, crouching on all fours as the lower floor erupted into a cacophony of thumping feet. She inched forward and peered her small head over the top stair. Humans were everywhere. The place suddenly swarmed like an angry beehive, rushing, grunting, back and forth, up and down. The indistinct chatter of guards barking at each other melded into one greater din of focused chaos. Each covered their faces with cloth, and each had a gnarly cast on their face that seemed to suggest they would not find a kobold skulking about the castle to be particularly amusing. Salvi wasn't really sure what was going on, but she did know she probably shouldn't stand around here anymore. She shimmied to the side and squeezed through the balusters, lowering herself into a shadowy nook beside the staircase, and dropped, landing nimbly on her feet as a set of guards climbed up the stairs. It was a good thing it was still dark. The guards just kept flooding in. She shrank away, her body slipping down the wall as she pressed herself into the corner as if her body were clay. All she could do was hide and watch as countless guards streaked by. Eventually the rush slowed and stopped, apparently every guard in the city already inside. They filed into the hallways on either side of the room, most towards where the strange cloaked man had dragged her, but several stayed behind to guard the exit. Could she stay hidden here until it all died down? She thought she might, until she noticed the pale sky peeking out from behind the front doors, now swung wide. She suddenly doubted she would stay hidden for much longer. She definitely wasn't shaking. She definitely wasn't afraid. She just needed some time to think up a plan. She quivered in the corner for some time. She tried and tried, but nothing she could think up would work. There was no way she could possibly sneak out from this position. Was there? But didn't humans have bad eyesight in the dark? She seemed to recall hearing that from somewhere. And with all that stomping and shouting going on, it would probably be quite difficult to pick out a single kobold moving around. Well, it wasn't perfect, but it was the best she had. Plus, she'd never been caught before, so why should this time be any different? She crouched and waited. Waited and... there it was! She loped out from the corner, dashing just as the guards looked away. She didn't breathe. Her blood seemed to freeze. Crouched low, wrapped in liquid dark, she slipped past the corners of their eyes and into the hallway. She flattened her back against the wall. Her heart pounded hard. Her held breath rushed out in an enormous, relieved sigh. And wait. They didn't hear, did they? She waited. Okay, they didn't. Well, that wasn't so bad. They really were bad at seeing in the dark. She skittered to the edge of the hallway, peeking around a corner, and what was there but another guard standing watch. He was far away though, past where the hallways forked. This would be easy. Now she knew all that she had to do was stick to the shadows and keep her head low. Humans were so tall, they probably couldn't even see her when she got that low. And their eyesight was... bright orange light leaked, glowed, and suddenly blazed around a bend as another guard appeared, jogging down the corridor. He carried a lamp in one hand and dozens of candles in the other. She spazzed in place, feet kicking and toes scratching like a startled cat before setting off like a cannon, scrambling into the intervening distance on all four. To say she felt utterly naked and exposed as the seconds seemed to stretch and stretch as she rushed through the open space would not have been very accurate. For she did not particularly mind being naked. But she did feel like someone had painted an enormous target on her back. The guard squinted, craning his head forward. Did the darkness just ripple? He gripped his spear. He took a step and stopped, light suddenly cutting into his eyes as the other guard jogged up beside him. It was too damn bright. The other guard handed him one of the fat candles. He lit it with the lamp's naked flame and was none too pleased. It was a well-known fact among the Night Watch, or anyone who has ever gone out in the dark for an extended period of time, that when you carry a light with you, all you really accomplish is trading the ability to see poorly everywhere, for being able to see well in a 5-foot radius and being blind everywhere else. Not to mention that it made you stick out like, well, like a light in the dark. Really? What kind of idiot would think that the guards of the Night Watch carried lights with them all the time? Unfortunately, there was no other choice inside this dark castle, where most of the rooms were wreathed in pure blackness. The other guard jogged off to distribute the rest of the lights. He took his candle and went off to give the halls another round. Salvi stumbled into the next hallway, but she did not stop. She kept going down the long corridor as light chased behind. She looked back and could make out every whisker of the guard's rugged face. How could he not see her? Even at night, with all the windows lining the high walls, it felt like she should have been impossible to miss. But then she remembered that he had voluntarily blinded himself with that light. How lucky! But it was only useful as long as she could stay ahead. She glanced at the room she had originally come from. She could go down the... what did the humans call it? The toilet? Could she go down the toilet again and escape? She considered it, then stubbornly dismissed the idea. She had just gotten these clothes, and they were nice. Most of all, she wanted to see the city. She kept running, reaching the end, and found a small door fitted with colored glass, through which filtered dark blue sky. The outside. Gently, Salvi grabbed the chest-height knob, cracked open the door and slipped past, as slow and smooth as syrup, before closing it inch by inch, until finally the latch met the strike plate. Delicately, she released the knob as if it would explode from one bad nudge. It closed without a sound. She tiptoed away. The orange light shone behind the glass just as she left. She couldn't believe that worked. The vigor of spring abounded all around. Countless flowers bloomed in beds of lush greenery, stretching long and wide, up and down in swathes thick and thin, more colourful than any rainbow, and more fragrant than anything she had ever experienced before. Trees cast down weeping limbs across lanes and cobbled paths. Creeping vines climbed up the frame of the pergola, wrapping around the legs of many garden benches. Growing and cultivating flowers purely because they were pretty? It was another incredibly human thing to do. She forgot herself for a moment and crouched behind a patch of gardenias. She stuck her snout into the bush and took a deep breath. Her eyes rolled into her skull, sticking there until she let the breath escape. They smelled really good. Maybe the humans were onto something. She ate one. They didn't taste nearly as good as they smelled. She snapped one of the stems and rolled it between her fingers, curious. Maybe she should try it like the humans. She was in a human city, after all. She stuck the stem into the lapel of her blouse, and it looked and smelled great. It was like when kobolds decked themselves in jewelry, except it was free. She was starting to get it. She was starting to get it. She dashed to another colourful bush, eager to compare scents, and froze. Feet crackled on the cobble in the distance. At least 2 pairs. Oh, right! She was supposed to be running away! She ran down the garden paths, trying to appreciate the scents as best she could at breakneck pace. Rounding another turn, only to find bushes and the high walls beyond, quickly realizing the garden was completely walled off. It was a good thing she was a good climber. Ducking into the foliage, she fought through 2 yards of leaves, bush and branch sticking into her. Already her choice of clothes were paying off. She decided humans might be clever, but they lacked common sense. She finally reached the tall brick wall beyond. The stepping sounds suddenly picked up their pace. All the rustling hadn't been as silent as she had hoped. She leaped up, dug the tip of her claws into the mortar between the masonry, and began to climb, brick by brick. Louder, louder, nearer, nearer. She climbed as fast as she could, while a spectre of terror breathed down her cold-blooded neck. Why did the humans need to make their walls so high? Her claws dug into the final brick. The tap, tap on the cobblestone reached their peak. She reached up, grabbed the top, swung her body over, and disappeared into a shadowy blur as two humans below shouted something. She dropped down, careless of the height, landed, crumpling forward. Her first few steps wasted, stumbling and flailing, before she found her footing and took off, sprinting. They would have called for backup, but she had planned to be long gone by then. She followed the inner wall across the wide, open courtyard. Guards walked the middle path, but they were too far away to notice her, or at least she hoped. The wall curved like a wineglass until she found the main gate set in the middle. She crept up close, hiding behind barrels and crates staged nearby. Several guards stood watch, glancing left and right, so high-strung as if a little schoolgirl had skipped by, they would have immediately tackled and forced her into a headlock. As far as she could tell, this was the only way out. And as far as she could tell, sneaking through was absolutely impossible. The sun would be up soon. Could she hide in one of the barrels? No, that was stupid. The gates were probably guarded every hour of the day. Though she wondered why it wasn't closed at a time like this. But these were humans she was talking about. They must know something she didn't. While she was thinking, one of them suddenly shouted, pointed at something as the other hurriedly blew on a horn. So hard she had to cover her ears before they all went running off after something. She stood there for a moment, taking it all in. Well, that was convenient. She scuttled to the gate, peeking her head past, and simply kept going, walking under the heavy iron portcullis to the other side. She saw the city open up before her from the hilly elevation the castle was built upon, as the golden rays of the morning sun crept over the horizon. No more guards were in sight. Casually, she strolled down the path from the castle and entered the city. It was incredible, amazing, great. Everything she had hoped for. She yawned, stretching her arms over her head. Now that she was out of danger, she suddenly remembered it had been over 30 hours since she last slept. She looked at the buildings all around her and the few humans walking the streets at this hour. They probably weren't going anywhere anytime soon. She slipped into the nearest alley, walking to the end, curled up, hugging a sack of something one of the humans had left there, and closed her eyes. She fell asleep instantly.